He was given a task to look after first-year students at the college. Umane. Noktula.
Hi, Sense.
Hayibo Noktula. Khona nje okukodwa okuswayo ukukhulumayo kuwe Noktula.
That's a beautiful.
Lindiwe.
What about my grandmother? And if she finds out she's gonna die?
Later joined by Sipho. Unfortunately, the university experience turned out hectic for all of them.
Pick up!
Shut up! No, what about my friend?
Some will make it through the storm, but others won't make it because of their decisions. Isingqumo Sami, coming soon on Hope Channel and SID Media YouTube channel.
Because now people might be saying, you know what, we are losing our identity as Adventists because we are now being more Pentecostal, being more charismatic. But another would say, no, we are not being charismatic. We are being African. What is Adventist music, madam?
You see, that's a very, very big question. Yeah. I'm glad you asked. It means that he who pays for the music determines what the music is to become. And if you are the buyer, then you influence largely what is put in the music. When you hear people saying Adventist music is like this and they point abroad, it shows you how successful the project of dehumanizing people has been.
A timely voice.
Adventuality SA presents
The greatest want of the world is the want of men. Men who will not be bought or sold. Men who in their inmost souls are true and honest. Men who do not fear to call sin by its right name.
Men whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole. Men who will stand for the right to the heavens, boy.
the Adventpod SA.
Yay, Adventers, we are back and with a bang, and it is the Adventpod SA, a timely voice indeed, and it is more with the great Dr Kgomotso Moshugi, right here in Braamfontein. We'll be covering what the audience have asked. We did portray it on our Instagram stories, and they came through the questions, right? I think the first question that I had here is, in your thesis, you stated there's a problem or an issue with the commercialization of Adventist music. Can you take us into that?
You want me to take you through a whole thesis?
No, just briefly to the problem, like what have you detected, encountered?
Yeah, no, sure. I'm trying to say, so it's a big one, and to maybe summarize it properly, there won't be justice to it, in that there's always context, to some of the claims that one makes.
Yeah.
But the one that you're referring to basically is a research project that seeks to understand the difficulties of navigating market contexts and sacred contexts.
All right.
The church as a sacred context primarily exists to to achieve social ends. Even though it may have economic bearings, but those are not always at the forefront, or they are not necessarily overt, you know. And that's a whole politics on its own. And on the other hand, you have the market, which, yes, there's claims to have interest in doing social good, but it's not primary for market contexts. That becomes like secondary. So primarily market contexts are about profit making.
Yes.
So you sit in a space as a musician, you sit in a sacred space that doesn't have models to resource the kind of work that you do. And then you adopt market practices and you want to pull them into the sacred space. But then there's a tension in aligning profit and
the social,
and altruism, you know. So what has happened, and this is a big one, maybe one will write about it, and like maybe that will provide a more coherent like a deliberation on what this is really. But there are issues with the production of gospel music, or the existence, the making, the performance, the use of gospel music, when the church doesn't want to take ownership and responsibility to resource that kind of work. It means that he who pays for the music determines what the music is to become, because they determine what they want to buy. What do you want to buy? Do you want to buy the music that is such? And if you are the buyer, then you influence largely what is put in the music. And so I'm not answering you directly, but I'm giving you more, and maybe I'm segueing into another question that you may be planning to raise, which leads to the title that you gave me, or you put for the podcast today, is The State of Adventist Music. And the reality is that Adventist music is, maybe you're still coming to
we can come there,
but ultimately this affects the state of the music. Especially because the music has to be resourced, and the question of resourcing will always remain, and it's always been there. And in fact, when you read the Adventist policy philosophy of music, which it's a lovely document, it's problematic in some ways, and I don't think they were necessarily trying to create problems. They were trying to solve problems. But like all documents, they need to be reviewed against the particular context of their practice or application. And so in my view, then it becomes problematic in that the context, the larger context that informs our immediate context is still very heavily Western. And even though some of the provisions in the policy, they call it the philosophy, kind of have provisions for maybe like local ways of doing things. But in practice, local ways of doing things, the system doesn't necessarily accommodate them. And so when you're talking about like a commercialization, you're talking about like a whole thing that in and of itself is a problem or is symptomatic of another problem. Why is it that we have to commercialize? We are commercializing to do what?
Now, okay, I think this is because we don't have structures in place, like you said, that have enough resource to keep the industry alive in the sacred space, right? Because I think that if we had our own networks and markets within ourselves, like we could then have resource enough to, you know, make it happen. So I think I'll go to the question that I think you touched on, but in a deeper sense, what is your feel on the compositions we are seeing currently in Adventist music? So are you feeling this is good, this is what we need more of, or are you feeling there's some sort of swerve, a sort of a tangent is taking place? I don't know, depending on the music groups that you listen to. I also want to hear about that.
Yeah, so who are the composers writing for? Who's going to buy the music that they compose that gets recorded? Who's going to invite them to perform? So it goes back to that same question. The way people are composing, the influences and the intentions that drive the market forces. Is it driven by market forces or is it driven by sacred forces?
Sure. Hey.
So that's a question to ask. And I think the compositions that you hear today sit in between that.
Yes.
Some need a little bit more, because you can tell people are trying to answer specific type of questions through the work that they are doing. They're saying, how does this become relevant? How do I do this and then get invited and get gigs and succeed and become a known group, a loved group? How do we create music that people will accept? Right? People are also trying to answer those things as they write. And they draw inspiration from some areas of the kinds of music that is more resourced. Because you must know, the music that gets the greater light of the day often is the music that has received the greater resource support. So while we're discussing Adventist music, blah, 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 that is not resourced, we will forever be influenced by the West because it produces from a position of resource. And we contribute to enabling that resource because we have been conditioned to appropriate higher value on things that come from the other. And when people create here, it's almost natural to provide limited resources. If you invite me to perform, you invite someone from abroad, you are going to say, chief, we don't have the budget. Transport. And that person, you will value them and say, it's American. And they come and you see value. It's how we've been conditioned, it's how we've been cultured. So I think the thing here that is happening is that we are dealing, it's a riddle of things that we are dealing with. First of all, you ask yourself, why is the word not resourced? It's because people have not thought that this work should be resourced a certain kind of way. They don't value that work. They say, it's a whole thing.
You mentioned a lot resource, the importance of this being resourced. And I'd like to think, and people will ask, you know what, music groups when they come through, preachers when they come through, we should only pay them for petrol. That's it. You know what, you're doing it for the Lord. In fact, sometimes you don't even pay, just arrive. Do you think, in your experience, there should be sustainable systems and mechanisms in place to fund ministries such as, I don't want to say no, but such as groups and preachers? Because I would say, pastors, what they do is a ministry. What you do as well as a ministry. So why is there some sort of, I don't know, misalignment between the two?
Well, do you want the simple one or the difficult one? Let's go to simple one.
Okay.
Well, in simple terms, the reality is that anything that has to be done and to be done properly gets resourced.
Sure, but the inverse. Yo.
Yeah. So some things will not necessarily be where they could be because of the continuous limited resources. Why do we want land? We want the land back. Because we are recognizing the limitations of under-resource state that we are continuously in. Right? So the idea of wanting land can be flipped, you know.
I'm just saying, right? But I want to know. But do you think there should be systems? What kind of systems and can we place for our generations? You know, when we are now.
Well, it's very interesting that you asked me that question, and of course I have an answer. But I think we should be asking the church this question. We should be asking the General Conference this question, and of course I think they do have some responses to such questions. But the primary thing here is that recognition that there are aspects of the work of God whose resource is not in question.
Yeah. On a lighter note, how did you find navigating relationships? I mean, romantical resuscitation in your group. So, in being in a group and in going to places or whatever the case may be, how did you navigate your romantical life in that space? You can answer authentically, you can answer however.
It's like I hear what you're asking, but you're not quite asking.
I don't want to ask you. I'm respectful.
You must ask. So misfire.
So some people would say, you know, we want to keep the group as the group, and we want to keep our relationships as the relationship. So some of them, they separate the two completely. Some of them do decide, okay, because we found friendship and a sort of, you know, liking to certain people in the group, we can sustain the group at the same time sustain the relationship within the group as well. So how did you navigate the situation and how did it come about for you?
Man, you know, life is life. Issues of relationships also, they are very natural. You put people together in the same space, the familiarity, you know, we find comfort and friendship and connections, and they build, you know, close relations. So those things you can't avoid necessarily. But at different times in the lifespan of the group and in the lifespan of individuals as well, depending on where you are, what stage you are in your life, some things take precedence. So you've got to ask yourself, like, where am I? Am I going to go far with any relationship that I create here? Do I even know if I'm ready for a relationship I can take far? And if I start anything here, is it going to compromise the work that we are here about? So you're always caught up between like those. You have to. I'm thinking like also hypothetically, just when you bring people together. Of course, you go to places and you're singing with ladies, you are guys, the audience has got ladies, has got guys, then you're out there, they see you, you see them, and we are all in the same social circle. And so things happen and then life happens. So I guess the most important thing that we are trying to ensure happens is that life happens and people are safe as much as possible. So, you know, if I'm in the group and some guy comes and is kind of wanting this girl in the group, you kind of check and say, this guy must not fool around with this girl, what, and then you are comforted when the guy is serious and like, okay, you know, that kind of things. But also, you also realize you also have to accept that people are people, and they have to make their own decisions, and you can't stop life from happening.
Sure.
But we are happy to enable relationships where possible and say, we met at the No Limits concert. That's nice.
That's lovely.
But life is life. You can't determine anything completely. And I guess relationships are important, right?
Very much.
All relationships are important. So for me, it's not even just really navigating like romantic relationships. It's navigating relationships, all of them, because complexities and problems happen even outside of like male-female relations. Even in the group, you know, navigating tensions and of different sorts. Those are the big things, going back to the questions that you asked earlier about how to navigate strategies and so forth. You know, it's almost important to have a code in the group, to have do's and don'ts, because do's and don'ts don't protect one person. If you agree on the do's and don'ts, you are saying, what is it that we want to put down that will make sure that we are safe from you? And this is also safe from you, so that you are then safe in this.
All right. I hear you now. There's a tension in the Adventist space right now, as you speak, between the liberals and the conservatives. All right.
Okay.
Now, I want to know from you. There's the one who say, I prefer worship at Orlando West, you know, Seventh Adventist Church. Traditional, you know, what and so forth. But another one is saying, you know what, I'd rather be at Calvin and Ethel, or I'd rather be at Kylie. Because now people might be saying, you know what, we are losing our identity as Adventists because we are now being more Pentecostal, being more charismatic. But another would say, no, we are not being charismatic. We are being African. What is Adventist music, my doctor?
You see, that's a very, very big question. I'm glad you asked. There's what Adventists think of as their music.
Hey! All right.
And there's what Adventists have as their music, but they don't recognize it as their music.
Okay, sure.
And it's a very difficult one, especially when you think of conservatives and liberals, and you think of, I mean, literally, when you're talking about music, you are talking about a language. Music is a language, it's a particular language. Okay. It's an integration of emotional sound. It's like sound with deep emotion. Words have emotion. You can say words and you're expressing your emotion through words. But when you put sound as in music to the sounds you make, then you are adding emotion to the sound itself. Then you attach words, okay, then you take it further, right? So what we are dealing with when we're dealing with music, we are dealing with sound, emotional, soul-based or soulful or soul-intending expressions, right? And then that sits often in how people think and how people speak.
Okay.
Which means like in language. So it's almost like when we're saying Setswana or whatever vernacular language, and then we want Setswana to be a language that people in the US use and understand. So it's like when we are talking about music and we're saying what is Adventist music, we're talking about a global church that has got like a wide spread of regions where it exists. And in the regions, there are different vernaculars in terms of language, just language itself. And language is it sits in our culture. It's a function of culture. Right? And so is music. Music is a function of culture. But when Adventists say our music is this, and they point to American expressions of music, it shows how successful the project of some type of colonization has been. It's so successful that people have no identity of their own. They have no recognition of what is their own. In fact, they claim and fight for what belongs to others as their own. So there are people today who strongly believe that certain types of music, that's Adventist music, and historically that music comes from cultures. It's like what you hear aspects of the King's Heralds do is what we could say comes from the barbershop culture, for instance, for example, in the US, which here we could say the Isqatamia culture, right? So if we were to be equal and fair, we would allow ourselves to use Isqatamia in the church in the same way that the Americans have allowed certain aspects of barbershop musical expressions into the church. And then we would take these forms and say, no, this one comes from the American cultural space. This one comes from the African, from the Zulu, maybe migrant worker. That's what it actually is. This Isqatamia thing. Anyway,
because I've seen that effect on me, the colonization, right? Because when I say Adventist music, I'm thinking of vocal union. I'm speaking of heritage singers, and that's a prevailing status quo in the church. Because I hear you now what you're saying is that no, that was actually in America and Europe, whatever the case might be, and we need to contextualize. I don't know if we need to contextualize or what, some form to us. That transition.
It's a very narrow way of understanding what music is to be of a local people. But I'm telling you, when you hear people saying Adventist music is like this and they point abroad, it shows you how successful the project of dehumanizing people has been, and even using religious means to dehumanize people. I'm telling you, God didn't make us African by mistake, and we are not also Zulu speaking what. No, that is part of what God gave us, or what God brought us into, so that He can use that for the advancement of the gospel. So we can't turn away from Setswana. Because then we are turning away from Botswana. Right? And then we turn away from them, but we want to evangelize them. But we are turning away from them. So we can't do that and think that we are being advanced. We are being loyal to the gospel. Being loyal to the gospel is also about recognizing where God has put you is where God will use you also. The people that surround you, your neighbor. Who's your neighbor? Who's the person who is steeped in local culture, local ways of understanding. And then we wonder why the Adventist church is not growing.
That's what I wanted to come through. I'm saying, I think we've become Europeanized. People cannot.
There's a
who are these guys? Like, instead of us being Christianized, I think we've become Europeanized in a way. And people are like, come on, what?
There's a dissonance, right? It's like, even in ourselves, we are, you said it yourself, you come into a church, some people in church are happy to sing in forms that they assume are more African and local. But we don't even know what an African Adventist look like, because that hasn't been modeled for us. And what we are modeling is coming out of resistance or rebellion,
frustration,
than necessarily a position of just to think maybe optimistically about how to really understand how to be Adventist and African. So the tension in the debate is showing up in the music. So it's not even about the music per se, it's about the complexity of understanding how to be an African and be Adventist. And some people will say, no, I'm an Adventist before I'm an African. In fact, I'm no longer African when I'm Adventist. Right? But they don't realize that the very formulations of expressing or living out Adventism is cultural.
Yes.
So I haven't answered your question. Maybe to
They don't know what is it, so that they.
So the question of music in the Adventist, I will say to you that in my work and in my observations, I think it's very interesting to look at how many diverse groups there are and kind of diverse styles of music there are in the Adventist Church at this point in our history. But also that tells you that for most of these groups, there's an audience. So the church has pockets of people who are really, we are for Reality 7, we are for Sensi, or no, we are for Hymns Ensemble and other. So it's like, even that if we were to call it a market, it's kind of fragmented according to the fragments of the styles represented by the groups. But that in and of itself speaks a lot of where we are as South Africans. So some people are writing from their cultural context, like KZN has got a very vibrant music scene, even in local communities, and in many ways, Senziwe, Reality 7 represent a lot of the community gospel work that's happening in those regions. And they are kind of integrating that into the Adventist Church. But what you find, maybe like with my hymns ensemble and stuff, they are bringing also a particular cultural expression that we have learned to relate to, that we have accepted as our form, as our identity as Adventists. So when they sing that kind of thing, we say, oh, this is
this is Adventist,
because people can relate, because that's the identity that they have assumed. So what this implies is that in actual fact, there's an identity crisis in the Adventist Church, and it shows up in the diversities of musical expressions or the disagreements, because maybe the tension is in the disagreements. But the disagreements also, they tell you that we come from a particular place. And so in my view, Adventist music, and now I'm going to speak to a little bit of worship, like church worship, like what you refer to, what's happening in Calvin and what's happening elsewhere. Adventists recognize the problem, some Adventists, the problem that comes with just embracing certain ways of singing a certain kind of way. Some are feeling disconnected. And some are feeling elsewhere, are feeling very connected when they sing a certain Western way. They say, this is Adventist, this is our way, right? And you can't fault someone for saying to you that this is how I hear God speak to me and I connect with God. And when that happens, they feel enriched and empowered. That's their experience, right? But what is happening then is that in totality, there's no clear definition of music. Even the musicians are just working. No one is really reflecting on what is happening in ways that maybe can be referred to thoughtfully, right? So the music, essentially, in my view, it's almost like everything that you're seeing, represents an identity crisis. And in another way, it also shows that as a result of this crisis, our music in its totality is in transition. So if you were to talk about the state of Adventist music, is a state of transition, a state of redefinition. And it's not landing, it's not coming to completion, it's ongoing. So it's almost like we have been in this state of trying to understand how to be African and Adventist. Some are saying to be African and to be Adventist sit in what we were taught. Others are saying no, but we need to bring what we are. You know, so we are in that constant state that is being heavily negotiated. When I say heavily, I don't mean that the negotiation is happening, but I'm saying there's a lot of weight in the process of moving along to kind of understand what is really going on. So we are in transition. Unfortunately, when we hear even worship leaders, like people who lead out in what we call praise and worship, you can tell there's no, it's almost as though people are trying to sound like something that we hear on our radio or that we watch on our DVDs. Hence I was saying earlier on that they are resourced, that's why they are on TV. They are resourced, that's why they are on radio. And when you resource them, it means that they will define what gets done. So if you don't resource what Adventist, now you can take this to the bank. If you don't resource the music that Adventists do, and you leave it to members to resource as much as they can in their limited ways, which is how things are happening, which is how groups are running. You go to practice, or people are just doing, you might get donation here, but people are resourcing on their own. It means that thing, the church is not investing in the music. It's allowing investment to come from the individual group, and the church is sure that no, then there'll always be music, and as long as the members are there and they form groups and they sing and we have someone who can sing and they lead out, there'll always be music. But the problem with that is that then we are listening to joyous celebration. But and we are listening to Spirit of Praise. And Spirit of Praise is kicking butt because there's a lot of resource that goes in there, and those musicians then have time to refine their art, to produce the type of quality that they produce. And then we look at what Adventist groups are doing and we say, they're good, but hey, the celebration it's hard, you know. And of course, then it means that our standard is measured against the people who are very heavily resourced, and then we are then at a lower scale, but then you expect that the music of Adventists will be defined by who? Who's going to define it? When we are living in a context, in a larger context of people like, we can't dissociate ourselves from other denominations, you know. So when you listen in church, you hear some leaders, choristers, they're trying to sound like some Zionists a little bit, but they don't quite name it. They are not Zionists, but they are bringing some flair. And then the congregation responds, and they also sing, and they are responding in a Zionistic way, but then the Zionists look at us and say, what fake thing is this? It's so weak, it's so inauthentic. So largely, and then they look at us also, the joyous celebration, and we are trying to do the worship, and they're like, this thing is, it misses, it's not it, you know. So then you ask Adventists, but what is it that you can do that is you? Then you start to sing, but then now we are sounding like Europe, America. And then we are like, okay, but then how do we actually sound? So we are sitting at that space, and that question is not being answered. I think people, you may not know the Thandaza chorale the way I have, because I grew up on them, and I think they were at the forefront of a revolution themselves to kind of bring certain changes to the space of music in the church. But they were heavily criticized, and they were, in fact, what you see Reality 7 doing now, and some people call the Africanization of something that we're doing. That thing started with the Thandaza chorale. When you listen to Thandaza chorale, there's an authenticity, in fact, about what they were doing that sends a whole lot of us running.
Hey, Ladies and gentlemen, apparently we're in an identity crisis, and I agree. Just in short, what you say, because I think when you go to Roman Catholic, you know this is how they sing the entire service.
Yes.
When you go to Kids, what's the other ones, IPCC and everything. But now when I introspect at the state of our church, divine service we sound like Europeans, and then afternoon then we become African, we become Zionist. So I hope this transition there will be some stability. Yeah. In conclusion, my doctor, at the end of it all, and I think you, in my view, I think through No Limits, you've immortalized yourself. Our children and our grandchildren always remember you. You've invested in beings in a way, not in things. How would you like to be remembered as?
Why is that question? Why is that question coming from?
No, just like at the end of it all, right? Since this is your purpose and so forth, like, yeah.
I'm not too sure that's how I operate in the world. That's how I function. So I'm not sure. I probably have answered that type of question, but because it's been asked in my mind differently.
Okay.
I don't think of how I want to be remembered. I think of how I want to be known.
Sure. All right.
So let me be known for my keen interest in bringing light. I am energized by the desire to leave a sweet taste in those who encounter me as a person. I want to leave someone feeling like, I thought I couldn't do it, but I think I can after they meet me. I want to leave someone feeling enabled but disabled.
Sure. Sir. I know, yeah. Well, it is the Adventpod. I didn't say my pastor. My great doc, thank you so much for the opportunity, and we really hope, I know most of you are looking forward to this, that it enhances you, that you are left enabled and not disabled. It is the Adventpod SA, a timely voice. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Dizoqhubeka ukumkhonza ndingadinwa wazifela izono zam. Hallelujah.